Chapter 3. Caden. I could tell the way Grail smiled at me that there was something there. He wanted to be warm, but something was stopping him, and it wasn't my age, or maybe it was. Maybe I came on as an unsophisticated buffoon. As my father liked to say, "Don't try so hard to make men like you." I think he considered himself my mentor. Now that was a laugh. However, he was a man, and he knew how a man felt. The laugh was on me. Then he tried to tell me he knew what men liked, when I asked his opinion on dating a hot guy I'd met for the summer, who'd come to visit his grandmother from Virginia. I made the big mistake of consulting him, and from that day on he was giving me pointers, whether I wanted them or not. I'd asked my father if I should bring my date some flowers because he was younger than me, or maybe candy. His response was, "Of course not, Kate, you don't want to run the guy away. It looks like you're ready to propose to him on the first date." He folded his arms, shook his head, and stared at me. "That's some kind of desperate," he assured me. However, my mother came to the rescue. "If he likes you, he'll understand. Now don't pay attention to your father." I think they said somewhere that mothers always knew best, and she did. The guy came back year after year, and finally he stayed with his grandparents, and he became my best friend. Lane never forgot those flowers and box of candy I lavished on him. He even said that it was because of those innocent gifts when he met his life partner, he knew it was real. With the right persuasion, maybe I could get Grail's attention, but I thought he was too old to fall for flowers or candy. He might run, and I didn't want that to happen. I'd probably have to think of something else. Asking my father was out of the question now, because I didn't think my father could help me, because I'd become too embarrassed to ask for his advice, and I was afraid he'd laugh at me. Nevertheless, I knew if I could get close enough to Grail, I would let him know that I could be his life partner. I had that much confidence in myself, because I had been raised by two of the greatest parents anyone could expect. Lane, a couple of our friends, and I were looking forward to summer, and if I could only get time off, I would find out if he was truly the one for me. I knew already, but it made sense if I could test out my theories. Lane and I were in our third year in college, and would graduate next year. Most of our friends were heading to Florida to get a tan, party, and do what most young gay and straight men thought was fun. Get a job, go on spring break, go back to college, graduate, and get the hell out of any small town that would limit you, and into the nearest city. Anywhere but here, I'd declared, before I'd stumbled over Grail. The name of this town alone conjured up nightmares for me in my youth. Who'd name a quiet, lovely small town, with beaches nevermore, unless there was some ominous meaning behind it? I had to find out, and the only ones who would know would be my grandparents or my parents. Since the last time I'd FaceTimed my grandparents in Minnesota, my grandfather didn't know who the hell I was. He'd thought I was my father. I guessed he and Granny were a bit too old and hadn't seen me in a few years, and probably forgot that I existed. Nevertheless, the next logical people would be my parents. I headed over there. Since I'd stayed with them from birth and all through my college years, and managed to save some money in my after-school and summer jobs where I was able to buy a small Jeep a few years old. Well, 10 to be exact, because Lane said that it would last me long enough until I could open my business, and after that I could buy a new car. Now that I'd seen Grail, I planned on using the extra money to move out from my childhood room and get my own apartment when I graduated. My father said if I graduated and stayed put in Nevermore, he'd help me open a small business in town. I was trying to figure out what I was interested in, besides letting Grail have his way with me. I mulled over just what was I good at, and what I could make a living at, and I came to the conclusion, nothing. That was until I met Grail Meadows, and my whole world opened up, and I thought about owning my own business. I'd been determined to match his sophistication with a little of my own. Driving around the neighborhood on my way to my parents' home, I realized that this was a beautiful little town, the kind you'd see on a picture postcard. Not the ones where, when you'd finally get a chance to visit, you'd wonder what the fuck everyone was talking about. Maybe it was Grail that was making me see the world and my hometown differently. When I first thought about leaving here, it wasn't because the people were intolerant of gays, but on the contrary, they made me feel as if nothing was wrong with being a gay man, and that was why my friends remained here as well. If they were looking to hook up with someone, they'd discovered they could go to the nearest city, and there wasn't any shortage of young men looking for a great time, and with the emergence of dating apps, that had been the answer to all their questions, but not mine. I wanted to be struck by lightning. I wanted my cock to twitch and wear a smile that never faded, and now I knew that could happen because it had happened to me. I had questions about Nevermore and Grail. That was why I'd headed to my parents' home after work, instead of hanging out with Lane. I wanted to know the why about Nevermore, and if they knew Grail Meadows, because everyone knew someone who knew someone in this town. That was probably where the expression of 6 degrees of separation came from. So on that theory, my parents would know his family, or someone who knew them. My parents, Jane and David Walker, loved the idea of introducing me to their friends, and telling them over dinner that I was gay. Their friends would then scrutinize me as if I was a new animal species in the zoo, and they'd pepper me with all types of stupid questions. How does it feel to be gay? They'd declare that they didn't know that I was gay, because I appeared to have so many girls wanting to date me, and my mother would tell them that was because I was such a gentleman and I loved females. Yes, of course, I loved women and girls, I loved my mother, but I wanted the love of a man. I had my father's love, and that was a given, but as a gay man it went deeper than he'd ever understand. I even had to explain to my father, who came up with the idea that he'd done something wrong. I comforted him by telling him that it wasn't him, but me. To which he accepted that answer, and became comfortable knowing that it wasn't something he'd done. After that talk, he didn't mind telling everyone that I was gay. It was a sense of pride that he could be open and accepting of a person's identity, and if he didn't accept my choices, who would? Because after all, he was my parent. My parents introduced me to everyone they knew as their gay son. Some appeared surprised to learn that there were LGBTQ people in their town, and since they had known me when I was a boy, they thought it would be a great contribution that would add to the well-being of Nevermore if I were to stay. It would show how tolerant and progressive the small-town people were, and the mayor and business sector thought that would be a great draw to get people to visit our beaches and shops. The businessmen floated around the idea that perhaps large companies would settle here in Nevermore, and then young people would stay, curtailing their flight to the cities in the nearby area. Even my boss, Mr. Welch, who owned and would sell franchises of his ice cream parlor all over our state, got in on the Keep Our Gays Home. He approached me and asked to use my face on one of the billboards entering Nevermore. Then he tried to run the idea by me one evening. We could put your face up there on that billboard holding an ice cream scoop, and the caption would read, "Come to Nevermore, because we have the best ice cream in town, and if you're gay you'll love it too. Our gays are homegrown and homemade, just like our ice cream." And he extended his arms in a jerky movement, and held out both hands as if he'd just invented the light bulb. Oh fuck me. I glared at Mr. Welch, and looked over at Lane, who was trying to hold back a snicker, because he knew that I was getting ready to blow. It was that look in my eyes, and my cheeks tended to redden when I couldn't keep quiet. I was horrified. No. I was beyond that. I was offended, to say the least. Yet I kept my cool. My father had said that half the battle was won, if you could just keep your cool under stupid circumstances. I'd listened and learned from him, because if there was a prize for the most stupid stuff I'd ever heard, then Mr. Welch's billboard would have run away with that prize. Any company that had thought about coming to this town after they'd seen that billboard wouldn't have thought twice. The name of the town alone would have had me running for the hills if I didn't live here, and that billboard, the way Mr. Welch envisioned, would have scared off any sane and rational person thinking this was a great place to live. Yet I had to say something. It must have been in my DNA. My mother was a woman who spoke her mind. All due respect, Mr. Welch, You have had some of the best ideas about selling your homemade vanilla and pineapple natural flavored ice cream, but I've never heard of anything so ridiculous in my life. I'm not going to be a party to you insulting me and every gay man in this town, or for that matter this country." I kept my cool, but there was no way in hell I could keep quiet. That was one of my flaws. I couldn't keep quiet when I knew something to be wrong, and just plain stupid. I was just thinking out loud, Caden. I just didn't understand. I patted him on the back and placed my arm around his shoulder, then led him back to his office, and declared that this would be my last year scooping ice cream for him, because I would be graduating from college. Then I planned on staying and opening my own business, but only if Grail would be here, and from what Lane had said, Grail was here to stay. Looking at Mr. Welch, he'd been shaken by the idea that he'd upset me, especially since he and my father had grown up together. "You're not going to open up another ice cream shop, are you, Caden?" I comforted him. "No, Mr. Welch. I think it will be a tea and coffee shop with baked goods." He sat back at his desk and let out a sigh of relief. "You're a good guy, Caden, and tell David they first know he's proud of you." Mr. Welch had convinced me that I had to stay, if only to prove that there had to be more gays in this town than Lane and his partner, me and Grail, who would benefit from the goodwill of the town. Mr. Welch mentioned that this would be a great place to raise a family. When he said family, I raised an eyebrow, and he commenced apologizing all over again. I hadn't even considered a family yet. I didn't even have a dog. My dog I'd had from my childhood had died, and I'd stayed depressed and lonely for the last 2 years. I was just coming from under my funk, and the man responsible for my sunny disposition was none other than that handsome blue-eyed man, who had my cock hard and my balls tightening. When I pulled up at my home, I looked around and thought about where all the gay men living in this town I'd heard about from Lane were. He'd found one, but maybe I wasn't looking at the time, and now I didn't want to look any further than Grail. It was only natural that I'd question that impression of all these gays running around this town, because I hadn't met any my age, except Lane. He couldn't have meant that there were only a few gay men in Nevermore. With 30,000 residents and a new college, there had to be more, especially if the population was rising every day. I had been determined to seek them out, and maybe do a survey. Who wouldn't want to be in a place where the beaches were pristine, and the sand, water, and beaches were like the ones you'd see in a magazine, and the people were friendly and welcoming, especially to gay men and women? But where were they, and why hadn't I met more of them? When I placed my key in the door to my parents' home, that was another question that had to be answered.